Welcome to the Big Sis Little Sis podcast. I'm Elle.
And I'm Ruby.
And we're two ethnic sisters here to talk about all things culture, feminism, and business.
Join us for weekly unfiltered and unapologetically female opinions and join in on the conversation.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Elle.
I'm Ruby.
And today we are going to be talking about something that's so interesting,
Yes.
Ruby. The prison of public reputation.
Yeah, so this is definitely a topic which I feel really strongly about. So if I get a bit heated during any of this, I apologize. Before we begin, I just want to give a big shout out to all the mothers who were able to drop their children back off to school. Congratulations.
You had a long 6 weeks and you did your part. You did well, and it's time for a break, perhaps.
Yes, time to relax. So Al,
Yes.
the prison of public reputation.
Yes.
Obviously a key word being reputations. So what is reputation? Well, reputation is defined as an opinion that is generally held about someone or something. So
Yeah.
basically how you or other people view yourself. So we're talking about how, public reputation relates to ethnic communities and particularly distinguishing the difference between an honour culture and a dignity culture. So both of those are the two sort of primary types of culture that we see in the world. They're not the only two, they're just the main two. And when we're talking about a dignity culture, what we're referring to is a culture in which your personal evaluations for your own behaviour and attitude will reflect your reputation. So it's really self-validation and, distinguishing the fact that you can tell yourself that you're a good person. Whereas in an honour culture, this is validated by your community. So what other people think of you dictates your reputation.
So, Ruby, what makes a good girl?
Let's talk about this, Al, because really there are kind of, two sort of black and white areas in each ethnic community, I would say, of a good girl and a bad girl. There's not really a happy medium, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, some of the things that I'm thinking about when I think about what makes a good girl, this is based entirely on my own experiences growing up, what I saw from my family and my community, my peers. Things that I would commonly associate with a good girl is things based on her appearance and what she does. So, what does she wear?
Exactly. Where does she go? Does she have any male friends?
Yeah.
Does she like to party?
Yeah, so does she go away with her friends and her boyfriend?
Is she a virgin?
Yeah, so that's really the crux
Yeah.
of, this whole good girl idea. It's really just based on sexuality, because when you dig deeper into all of those questions about, well, how do we define a good girl, it all sort of relates back to her own sexuality.
Exactly. Rather than focusing on, is she a good person? Does she help other people? Is she caring? Is she empathetic? Rather than focusing on her core values, unfortunately, and we just basically judge her on her appearance and how she lives her life.
Yeah, and I'd say that this is pretty across the board.
Across the board. I mean, it's the same thing in most cultures.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, not necessarily, and we're not specifically talking about Turkish culture here. We're
No.
talking about most of the Middle East and Europe, and I'd say some of the Western cultures as well. It's based on how well she defends her purity.
Okay, so on the contrary, Ruby, now let's talk about what makes a bad girl.
Okay, so bad girl. So we're thinking kind of
Ooh.
the opposite of a good girl. So if I'm thinking about it from a sexual perspective, which is basically what this whole thing is built on, I'm thinking about somebody who's probably open with her sexuality, somebody who maybe dresses in an inappropriate manner as deemed by their
the short
community.
skirts. Perhaps even somebody who is quite independent and lives by herself. Of course, after a certain age, I think it's become more acceptable. But, in your early 20s, if you're an ethnic girl, or in your late teens, moving out of home is definitely not accepted within the honour culture, I would say, from what I've seen or experienced.
Yeah, it's definitely an unusual thing. And I guess, seeing those types of girls who do move out of home, they also fall into that same line of people who don't generally require approval from their family or their peers. So these all dictate a bad girl, I would say, in terms of what our experiences are within the ethnic community. But what's really interesting, Al, is, you know, as you said, we're talking about somebody who is strong, independent, comfortable with herself and her sexuality.
Yeah.
And all I can think about is, you know, these big Hollywood movies, which, you know, have a storyline protagonist, this girl, she's strong, she's independent, and it's celebrated. So having this type of behavior is actually celebrated in the Western world. However, it's so interesting because that's based on a dignity culture.
Yes, and it's really difficult, I think, being raised on an honor culture, but living in a country that comes with a dignity culture. You just feel conflicted because you're raised with these shows that embrace these behaviors, yet you can't live them, or you know, you're not encouraged to do those things or openly express yourself, just because you're worried about bringing, you know, so-called shame on your family or
Of receiving judgment.
receiving judgment from the community. Exactly.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I experienced, you know, having non-ethnic friends growing up in a, you know, predominantly white Australian country. So it's difficult for our kids. It was difficult for me to see, you know, my friends talk about the things that they're going to do and how their parents support them and their aspirations. But I have to think about the bigger picture and is this going to impact my family in any way?
Yeah, exactly. Is, you know, one of the aunties in the community going to get a call?
Yeah. Oh my God. Right.
You know, and tell my mum they've seen me somewhere with a bunch of friends. I mean, completely innocent, but obviously, you know, different generation, and, you know, really strong honor culture ranking. They perceive it as something that's negative, unfortunately. I mean, I remember starting uni, and I'm 18, and all my friends were Australian, and they were making plans to go out on a Friday night. And I think at 18, 19, my parents weren't as relaxed as they were when I hit my 20s. So I was kind of like, oh no, I've got to be home at this time. And they were like, but what do you mean? Or they're planning on getaway trips. I was like, oh, you know, boy, girl, totally cool. They're just relaxed. But I wasn't able to go to these, you know, outings because, you know, your parents kind of are a little bit worried and they don't want anybody saying anything bad about you, basically.
Yeah, they're just pretty strict on that honor code, as you said. And it is a scale. So when we are talking about the honor code, we are talking about, you know, how you and your family rank on this system.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just going to classify it as 1 to 10. 1 being you don't give a crap what anyone thinks about you and it doesn't impact your family. And 10 being you cannot be seen doing anything that will cause shame.
And I think the scale leans towards 10 more in some countries, like Pakistan, you know, Saudi Arabia, where they're really strict with the way women should behave. And it's not a matter of, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. It's, you know, there could be even consequences, Ruby, like death, you know, if, you know, you do have premarital sex and these things happen around the world.
Yeah, and it's really, really sad. I mean, obviously I'm talking on a very general basis. We're quite lucky here in Australia, you know, we have laws that protect us from these sorts of things, but honor killings are a real thing.
Yeah, it happens.
And they happen, and it's so disgusting that these still happen in this day and age.
Exactly. I mean, I haven't heard of anything like that happening in Australia.
Oh, it has. It has happened in Australia.
Has it?
Yeah, 2 Pakistani women were killed by their brother
Oh, God.
just a few years ago.
Oh, that is insane.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing that goes on here is if, you know, there was a situation where there was premarital sex. I have seen some families kind of, you know, once they find out about it, either they try to rush the wedding along, or if it's an unsuitable partner, they'll just try to take them either overseas to find them a new partner and rush to have them married, or, you know, search within the community here. So those sorts of things I have personally seen within the community. because it's brought shame to the family.
It does, Al. And, the reason is obviously, if something happens that is deemed like unsuitable, if there's premarital sex or someone's been caught doing something, it's really just a fight or flight. Like, you either have to fight to defend your honor, or you fight and you try to recover anything that's left over from it. So, we have these strict honor codes, but they can result in labeling, which is unfortunately virtually based on women. It's not really consequential for men.
Men, exactly.
So I'm thinking about women who often get labeled a slut.
Yep.
And who get slut shamed by other members of that community, which really hurts not only that person, but it hurts the reputation
Yep.
of the entire family. It's not even necessarily that I'm talking about a slut in the context of somebody who's had many sexual partners, that in a typical connotation that we
Yep.
would think about it, which I totally disagree with, by the way, as a side note. I'm just talking about girls who I've personally seen grown up be labelled sluts just for wearing a short skirt.
Yeah.
Just for posting a bikini pic. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah. No, you're a slut. I mean, you could be the purest of purest girls, in terms of the honor culture. You could be this amazing person that does so much career, or like you can be such a lovely person, but the moment that photo has been posted of you wearing something that's not, accepted within the community, the honor community, you're a slut.
Yeah. And this doesn't necessarily matter for people who don't rank high on the scale.
No.
And just for an example, Al and I would say we both rank pretty lowly on this scale. Between 1 and 10, I might give myself a 2 or 3 in terms of how I feel about the honor code and how I want to represent it. But my family doesn't rank the same. They actually
No.
rank quite high on the scale,
Yeah.
and they care because it's what they know, and
Yeah.
they like being a part of the community. So
Yeah.
they have to uphold the
I mean,
community
look,
values.
having a community is amazing. Coming from an ethnic culture is actually amazing, and there are definitely lots of pros to it. And you feel like you belong. So I understand, and especially it's really difficult for them because they came from a different country, Ruby, and they just wanted to feel like they belonged in this country. So I totally understand why we're at this point.
Yeah.
Because we're first generation. Community does have a beautiful, welcoming feel to it. But we are very judgmental. And the moment a community member, does something that's out of the norm, we can expel that person immediately from the community.
Yeah. And, if some of you are out there thinking, oh, look, this doesn't really apply to me, just maybe take a moment to consider where you and your family and your friends sit on that scale, because despite the fact that we keep referring to this, community, there are almost like subsets of communities which are based on that scale. So you've got people who are closer to 9s and 10s and people who are 1s and 2s.
Yeah, and who are just, they've kind of adapted, maybe people who have even adapted the dignity culture.
Yeah.
Because they do live in a Western country.
Absolutely. And I guess, the reason, Al, that it does get perpetuated continuously despite, having gone through multiple generations, this is something that has been studied quite vigorously worldwide. It's not just, a very specific thing to Melbourne, Australia, in the Turkish community. This is very
worldwide.
broad.
Yep.
And there is a 2014 article by a guy from Belgium whose name I apologize, I cannot pronounce that well. It's Klaart van Kerkem. And what he says is that the task of protecting community culture rests on the shoulders of women.
Yes.
Who are often regarded as the designated keepers of culture and responsible for holding the cultural line, as well as maintaining racial boundaries and marking the cultural difference. And consequently, conformity pressures and control are stronger for women, and family restrictions are often gender biased, with the daughters facing more restrictions on their autonomy and mobility.
So just a question to you guys out there, to anyone that has a brother. Have you ever experienced the gender bias act within your household where your brother was allowed to, or perhaps he didn't have a curfew and he was allowed to come home whatever time he pleased, or he was kind of allowed to have several girlfriends and that wasn't an issue to yourself? So, although we like to think, oh no, maybe not so much, but then when you really dig deep and you think, oh yeah, actually my parents were possibly a little bit more lenient towards my brother because, you know, he's a guy. And like Ruby said, it's the weight is on the women's shoulders, definitely.
Absolutely. So because the honor culture does, you know, lean heavily towards a woman's honor,
Yeah.
that's why we obviously have more pressure to maintain, uphold those values.
And there's a Turkish word for that, Ruby.
Yeah. So actually, just to get into that a bit deeper, Al, there actually is a concept of gendered honor, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of Turkish culture because I'm just looking at some research which was done by Michael Boyge and Derya Güngör, which discusses the different types of honor between men and women in Turkish culture. And what they say is that there's a certain type of honor which is possessed by men and is referred to as şeref, and the type of honor that's possessed by women is referred to as namus. And as a, you know, bilingual person, when I think about those words, the word namus, for example, it relates entirely to a woman's sexual honor. So it's very based on sexuality. And the shame that's associated with losing namus, it doesn't only destroy the woman's honor, but also her husband's and her brothers and her families.
The whole families. Yeah.
Everyone gets impacted by it. So
it brings
that's why it's
shame,
so important to, you know, excuse my phrasing, keep the girls on a leash just to defend and protect that honor.
Exactly. Whereas, you know, and the men are held responsible, accountable. You know, the brothers have that responsibility. So if you are walking down the street and you have your brother next to you and somebody says something to you, you know, a man, perhaps a sexual comment, you know, he feels like he needs to jump in and protect your namus, basically. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, you know, the men do have a bit of weight on them as well to protect your honor.
Absolutely. And it's totally unfair. I mean, it's so deeply embedded, and I had this conversation with our brother Mel about how deeply embedded in this honor code is, because at first he sort of said, no, I don't think so. But when I said, but what about this time? And what about that time?
Yeah.
And if this happened to me on the street, how would you feel? And I know exactly what would happen is he would be immediately, you know, enraged and have to defend me and, you know, clap back and maybe even start a fight with whoever is challenging my honor.
I mean, look, in any brother-sister relationship, doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, I think brothers generally take that role. But I think for somebody who does come from the honor culture, they take it to a whole different level. It is like offensive and shame, like it's like an insult for not only her, but like the whole family. So they really take it personal. And yeah, I've seen it from cousins, from friends. And yeah, it's happening.
Yeah. And look, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. I love the fact that I have a brother and cousins and family who I can depend on if I was in a situation where I needed help.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're not in a culture that says, oh, each man for himself. We have amazing benefits of this culture. It's this whole togetherness and looking out for each other. But what I don't agree with is the pressure that we put on our men and our women to preserve and uphold these values, where I think sometimes it's a bit unnecessary. I mean, if somebody says something to me on the street, whistles at me, I have absolutely no expectation for my brother or my husband to get up and start a confrontation with that person, because who cares? It's a fleeting moment. You know, you keep walking. It's not going to affect my life. But one decision can affect your life forever. And, you know, I think about the violence that's involved and think about, let's get everyone together and let's bash this person. And what if someone has a gun out? And they can. It's threatening. Like, I do not want anyone to get hurt because of me. Something that I think that we're all familiar with, Al, you're probably familiar with it too. Do you guys remember the movie and the book titled Looking for Alibrandi?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that was so good, wasn't it? It was really funny because there's this whole concept in the movie about these nonna spies.
Yep.
Who were like constantly spying on Alibrandi.
Yep.
And, you know, there were these cute grandmas.
Spies in the community.
Right. And there were these cute grandmas with their binoculars and their grey hair, and they're literally reporting back instantly, as you mentioned earlier. And this is not just an Italian thing. This is not just a Turkish thing. This is across every ethnicity, I think.
I think there was a, what was it called? My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Same scenario. It's like, you know, the mum receiving a phone call, and it's like constant and it's like spies
It's like a
spies
network.
everywhere within. Yeah, it's a network. Spies
Yeah.
in the community.
And so it's funny because, you know, we think about who perpetuates this whole spy network situation. And I'm thinking about tasers.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about zetas and teas and khaltos.
Yes.
Right? We
The
all have them.
aunties of the community.
The aunties.
Bless them.
Right?
Adorable. They love feeding you and taking care of you, and they adore you
And getting information.
until you have done something that you are not supposed to be doing. You know, if it's like holding a boy's hand, or even having
Oh, that's it.
yeah.
You're
I
done.
think it changes from obviously what age you're at.
Look at the honor code changes community to community.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously some cultures holding hands is fine, but you know, being caught out at a hotel is a big deal. Like, it depends on the community, but it's funny just because, you know, the way I think about these families is, you know, when you're higher on the honor scale, what it does is it forces you to either not participate in these activities, which can compromise
you don't want to risk anything.
or you just learn to do a better job of hiding it.
Yeah, you just have those skills, or you develop those skills at an early age.
Exactly. Al, there was this study that I came across, which I died. I saw the title and I actually lost my shit, and I think you lost your shit too when we saw it. And it's this study by this this lady called Jerang Gunsoy, and the title of the study is, "Would you post that picture and let your dad see it?" Because that's
And I mean, that's quite funny, but it's also quite telling.
it's really telling of, you know, the type of pre-planning and thought we have to put into everything, especially when we're talking about social media.
Yes. And how, you know, people have access to it now. Everything's online and you're sharing your life, but you have to be careful of, you know, what you're wearing and what you're doing, because ultimately it's not even just your mum, dad. Everyone is
People
there
talk.
and people talk.
Yeah. And not even that, Elle. I remember, like, sometimes if I was out and I took a photo, what's in the background of the photo? To that degree,
degree.
I was having to look meticulously, make sure that everything's clean,
Yeah.
who's visible. Sometimes I would block certain people from seeing my photos just because I know.
And I think, Ruby, the older we've gotten, the less we don't really care anymore, and we're quite open. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen our social media accounts, and we just have a bit of a laugh and a bit of fun just sharing everyday events. And I guess that comes with maturity and, you know,
Not even just maturity, Al, but self-esteem as well,
Self-esteem.
because, you know, having to constantly think about what you're going to put and how you're going to word it, it does play on your self-esteem. And I remember I used to be this person maybe, you know, 1 or 2 years ago who would constantly think about what I'm going to post and what hashtags I'm going to use and who's going to judge me, and, oh, is this too sexy, or is this too cocky? Is this like stupid? And just constantly doubt myself. And, you know, through this process of self-acceptance and actually reducing those scores on the honor scale,
yeah.
I've been actually able to become truly free by letting go of what other people think.
And exactly, sharing whatever you damn well please.
Exactly.
And it's, you know, if somebody has a problem with it, that's not your problem, that's their problem.
Yeah. And so I guess, you know, what I'm trying to say is I love having a culture. I love having a community. What I don't love is having the pressure that comes with the honor code attached to that community, because I think we can be a very functional community without the pressures of an honor code.
I think one of the main issues that we are still experiencing on a very strong note, Ruby, is intercultural marriages and what those women experience and the backlash they receive from the community and their families. And it's really difficult.
What I want to share with you guys now is an interview that I conducted with my beautiful friend Barna and her husband Mitchell, which discusses some of the complexities that they had to face within their interracial marriage. So please enjoy. Thank you for taking the time to join us to tell us a little bit about your personal experience, you know, having a interracial or interethnic marriage, if you will, and your experiences. So Barna, if I could start with some questions for you. So tell me, when you and Mitchell were together, at what point in time did you tell your family about the relationship?
Unfortunately, I had to keep our relationship a secret for a number of years, for at least about 3.5 years. And when I did tell them, it wasn't great. They weren't very accepting. And the sad thing is as well, it wasn't necessarily my family, but a lot of my close friends and support network as well were, I think, in complete shock that I was in a stable and positive relationship with someone outside of my culture and religion.
Yeah, so it sounds like the reaction you received was not necessarily what you were expecting, or did you have the expectation of backlash?
I think because I kept it secret for so long, I did have that expectation, especially because a lot of my family, I was studying at the time at university, and their expectation was that, I would eventually marry with someone who was of the same ethnicity and religion once I finished graduating. And, Mitchell and I started off as really good friends, and then our relationship began from there. And, we've been together now 10 years. This is our 11th year and our 7th year, married. So we're really, really happy. But it was just the reaction was what I expected, but I hoped it would have been different.
Yeah, of course. And I suppose along that vein, how did the community treat you guys, or, how did your family treat you guys after the fact?
I'm not going to lie or sugarcoat it. There are still members of my family who isolate themselves from us, who refuse to be a part of our lives because we decided to be together, because Mitch is, has a different identity to me and to my family and to our community. And I think that's quite disheartening. And even some friends, I've lost some really good friends as a result who, really tried to talk me out of the relationship. My family did as well. Not all of my family, some of my family members were very supportive. Like my grandparents were amazing once they finally got to meet Mitch and see how kind and supportive and compassionate he is. But there are still some family members who refuse to interact with us.
Yeah, and it's really sad, isn't it? Because it's, as you mentioned, it's not a matter of the fact that he's a bad person. It's actually the opposite. He's amazing and so supportive, but it's just about the identity entirely.
And can I just say, you've taken the words out of my mouth. That's the people who are no longer in our lives and not of our choice, but of their own, have said to us, Mitch is a great guy. I'm sure he'll make a wonderful husband, but we can't accept him because he, isn't a member of the community that I was in or still am. I still see myself as a strong member of my culture and my religion. So they saw your character and your personality, but I guess refused to accept who he was and who we wanted to be together.
Yeah, and I suppose, you've been through this whole ordeal about your relationship, and has your feelings or thoughts towards, the whole honor code system in your community changed?
I think so. Yeah, it's still really hard. I mean, that's how I was brought up. I could only ever be with someone who was of the same religion or the same ethnicity. But then, going to university, meeting all these diverse people. I mean, we live in Australia. You meet all these wonderful people, and I think we need to move away from honor and this really strict, this passion that we have for our culture where we have to keep it within the community. I mean, although we come from completely different backgrounds and have completely different faiths, our morals and our values and our ethics are so similar. And that's one of the first things that I fell in love with Mitch, is how strong his morals are, and some of the other friends that I had, male and female, who were of the same culture and religion, didn't necessarily share those same morals and values that I looked for in a partner.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that you bring that up, Barna, because, we discuss this whole honour system and this dignity system, and typically what we find is that people from Australian or, America or UK backgrounds do tend to base their morals and values around a dignity system, so they don't need to be validated by their external peers. And that's probably what makes Mitch such an amazing person. So thanks for being amazing, Mitch. On that note, I have a few questions for you. So obviously, you were probably introduced to the Turkish community for the very first time once you met Banu. What was your first impression of the community like, given everything that you guys went through?
It's a bit hard to say because obviously we were together for so long before I sort of got introduced to anyone. So obviously I met a lot of her friends and that sort of thing beforehand, and them, and then a few years later met her family. But the community was always this thing that everyone sort of spoke of, like sort of with fear about, like, oh no, we can't do this or can't do that because what will the community think about? And to be honest, I'm not really sure what the community is, because I haven't really met anyone who's like, okay, yeah, we're the community. It's just family members and friends and that sort of thing. And all these people that have had problems, everyone's been sort of really lovely in my face, and all the issues and everything else sort of happens in whispers and shadows, sort of behind closed doors, and with her then rather than directly with me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's all about the perception of what other people will think. As you said, there isn't really one name to put to the community. It's a congregation of whispers, unfortunately. Do you have any examples of any aspects of that honour code that we sort of have in our community that you maybe struggled to come to terms with?
I think generally, like, I understand the honour code and I can see it intellectually. Like, I understand what it is, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because like with the community, I can see how much benefit people get from it. Like, I've brought up an Anglo background, and obviously people from your community, the families seem so much closer, and so there's so much great from the community as well. But it is that double-edged sword of the expectations around what everyone is supposed to do is so rigid and strict, and everyone's sort of tiptoeing around what they really want to do. And I'm sure there are people within the community that are, the benefits outweigh the negatives, and in fact, there's certain people there probably wouldn't be any negatives because they're happy within the framework of what the community expects. But certainly for us, the community and what the expectations were around there made things difficult for us. And me as an outsider, maybe not so much, as because everything we sort of received didn't come to me. All the threats and everything else went to her. So
yeah, exactly right. I agree with you there. I mean, as you said, it's it doesn't come without benefits. It's very much an exclusive membership to be part of these communities. There are definitely some benefits, but it's at a price, and the price is that honour code. So, either of you, do you have any advice for any couples who are experiencing something similar?
I mean, for me, like, I found it very difficult. I mean, I have the utmost respect for my community, for my friends, for my family. I mean, they're everything I love in this world. And I think, don't give up if you genuinely have fallen in love with someone who you think maybe your family isn't very accepting of. If they share similar morals and values and ethics as you, introduce them to your family, and give some time to your family. I mean, the most accepting members of my family are the ones who I thought would never come around. My grandparents, they're from Turkey. They haven't had an Australian education, and they are quite religious, but they love Mitch like a son. We go over for dinner and breakfast every weekend, and they always call him, Mehmet, or like Mitchell with an accent, and like just love him and treat him like their own. But it's taken time.
Thank you for participating, Banu and Mitchell. We really appreciate your perspective. and hope that, you know, members of the community can actually see what they're doing and the damage they're causing and the hurt that they're causing for these people. So we have a surprise guest next week who lives in the heart of the community and deals with these issues. So stay tuned. It's going to be intense and raw and really give you an insight to what's been happening firsthand, and also some advice on how to overcome the pressures. So stay tuned, guys.
We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Bye.